talk about what you did and how effective that was.
Yeah, what is very interesting is listening to colleagues from Brazil and I think the Philippines, Rappler. The fact that different strategies were deployed to effectively manage misinformation, both on social and traditional media. But in doing that, it was important to understand the nuance with regards how things happen in the various countries. And something similar had to be done in Ghana. And to be effective in fact-checking during elections, you would have to be intentional. You would have to be deliberate about your strategy. If you don't, it becomes evident in the way you deploy your resources to fact check on the day of elections, or even before the elections, or even after the elections. So for us, what we did, we started working towards the elections 2 years on. We started by trying to understand the ecosystem of misinformation in Ghana. So we launched a study, and this is something that normally media organizations don't do because of the day-to-day hustle and bustle trying to get the news. You get plugged into that system, and it's very difficult to sit down and reflect on the things that actually consumers of the news and the public really want. So we conducted a survey of 400 Ghanaians across the various regions of Ghana to understand the ecosystem of misinformation and get some feedback from the public. And the public actually directed us into the various areas to concentrate on, and actually told us what they wanted, which fed into how we deployed and tried to leverage on the various networks that we plugged into during the election process. So after getting feedback from the public, we decided from the feedback we got that it was necessary to collaborate. And in doing that, we went around Ghana, trained in excess of 30 media organizations to set up fact-checking desks in their newsrooms, because there is always the challenge that, where fact-checkers operate is within the intersection of journalism and digital media. So knowing how to use digital tools to flag misinformation seems to be a challenge here, and studies have pointed to that. So we decided to make sure we decentralize whatever knowledge and skill we had by going around the various media organizations, training and ensuring that these media organizations had in-house journalists. But this one should be mentioned in context. We are a very slim team of fact checkers, and we would not have the resources to be able to reach people both online and offline. And it is evident that majority of Ghanaians consume their news via radio and TV. So to be able to get people both online and offline, there was the need to collaborate. So we helped media organizations set up fact-checking desks. We created a fact-checking network made up of more than 100 journalists. And we created a multi-organizational collaboration, which involved credible civil society organizations, observer groups, and also the internet companies to be able to effectively deploy our resources and be able to reach the public. So I think for the starters, this is what we did in terms of trying to lay the groundwork to be effectively be able to reach the public with our fact checks during the process.
And how did that work when all was said and done? You went to the election. How did that system hold up?
So we were planning towards the elections, and we had to deal with COVID-19. So there was the need to do lots of learning during the COVID-19 deployment of our resources and trying to debunk COVID-19 misinformation, getting plugged into the global network of fact checkers, getting to work with the internet companies. So it gave us great insights, and we used that knowledge base in executing our election project. So on one hand, we had already started discussions with the internet companies with regards to COVID-19. So it was very smooth having to kind of bring in the issue of elections, having to safeguard elections. And Facebook was quite forthright with regards how they were going to work with us to deal with misinformation, helping escalate claims with them. We also we wanted to plug into, because fact checking is relatively new here. So we had to plug into what traditionally was identifiable with the public, the organizations that had credibility. So we had to plug into the largest election observer group in the country. So CODEU, we plugged into their resources, since they would be having election observers across the length and breadth of the country. We plugged into that setup. We also started conversations with the EU election observer group, the Commonwealth election observer group, basically trying to make sure that we had people on the ground who would help us verify whatever misinformation there is online as well as offline. Then there was also the need to reach out to the election management body. So we plugged into a network that had been created by an organization known as the West African Network for Peace Building. So they were bringing critical organizations in the management of the electoral process around the table. So we had the Electoral Commission, the Election Management Group, we had the Ghana Police, we had critical core civil society organizations that were working to deal with the elections and ensuring that there was kind of a good management of the process, so it wouldn't lead to violence and chaos. So we were plugged into that system as well. So you could see that on multiple layers, we were engaging with core organizations that would help with getting us the right information. So that has to do with the supply side. Now, the demand side would have to be we relaying the credible information to media organizations that would want to amplify that to the public. So we did that as well by making sure that we understood what really the issues were and what the dynamic was here in Ghana. We know majority of the public would consume their news via radio and TV. The reason why we plugged into the network of radio and TV platforms. But we know online misinformation is thriving because not much is being done to deal with that. The reason why we also partnered with kind of the leading digital media platform in the country to ensure there was cross-publication of our fact checks online. So,
oh no,
be filtered offline.
Oh, there he is.
We're dealing with whatever misinformation. Am I on?
You're on, you're here.
Yes.
Okay, so we're dealing with whatever misinformation there was online, and we're dealing with it as well offline. Even with the offline bit, there was the need for media literacy, because it's not just in Ghana, it's not just in Africa, actually across the world, there's a challenge with regards to misinformation literacy and digital literacy. So we tried within the period ahead of the election to do some trainings for a critical mass group, which has to do with the youth. And we targeted tertiary institutions. So we tried to do trainings for students of the University of Ghana. We did some trainings as well for Ghana Institute of Journalism students and Institute of Business Management and Journalism, somewhere in the north. Basically trying to ensure that a critical mass of the public is exposed to how to flag misinformation and how to verify them by themselves, instead of just relying on fact checkers who are operating in a niche group to help out in that way. So it's crucial that you put in place strategy that is informed by the dynamics in the country to be successful in fact checking during the period.
Got it. We get a question from the Mongolian Fact Check Center, and it's a good question. We have a series of questions here, so I just want to bring these up and ask anyone who wants to jump in. So this person's saying, I'm joining from the Mongolian Fact Check Center. I'd like to ask a few things. Should we accept requests from a particular party to fact check claims related to them? Is it right to check political, specifically certain parties related to misinformation when we're non-partisan? Should we check all the news with a balance during the election? So during this, I guess this sort of gets to a question of partisanship. If particular parties are saying, oh, this party is they're doing all of this misinformation, like how do you balance that out? Like how do you make sure that your fact checking doesn't get construed in that way? And how do you choose what to fact check with regards to political parties and what they're saying?
I think largely our work is informed by the IFCN Code of Principles, which tells us to lay out the methodology that we use in producing our fact checks. So that is very palpable on our platform. And as part of the methodology, for us to select a claim to verify, it has to be coming from a known organization or body in the country. It has to have gone viral. It's something we look out for before we select a claim. And it should be the case that if we don't verify it, it has the potential of creating unease for the public or some negative impacts to the public. So if it fits the bill, we simply select it and we do the verification. We try as much as possible to balance things off in terms of verifying misinformation coming from particularly Ghana, where we have two dominant political parties. We try as much as possible to pay attention to rhetorics coming from the two dominant political parties, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if we have an overwhelming number of misinformation or suspicious claims coming from one political party, we would want to balance things off. So we would be hesitant in doing that. But I don't know, the other panelists would also have something to chip in here.
Yeah. I want to jump in. So I guess it all starts from what do you fact check, and it's not just about like where it's coming from, but it's really like what are the things you prioritize. And in our case, what we try to prioritize are like one, there's claims about the process, whether the process is are there problems with the process? For instance, those are things that we prioritize. We look at problems, any claims about the system, the electoral system, because the Philippines, like Brazil, we have an automated election system. There's Gilberto here has already said that there's a lot of misinformation about automated systems, and what we try to do there is to make sure that there's we give as much nuance about the system as possible. So you start with like really informing people about how the system works, what are the safeguards, what are the layers to the system, because if they think it's alchemy, then they will, then they will believe anything, and really that's part of it. That's part of it is looking at like what can you watch in the system, so and what are real indicators of fraud that they can watch for. So those are things that we really look out for when we fact check. We try whenever possible to get access to data, so that and for the Philippines that's a challenge, because we're talking here of national elections, national and local elections combined, with like thousands of candidates running, and you get as much when you're trying to do that and trying to fact check something like that, you try as much as possible to get information about those about as much as information, as much data as you can in those levels, including data about the results, because how do you then fact check things? So we look at that. We look at the candidate claims, because candidates typically make really exaggerated claims. We look at that, but we also look at issues and contextualizing issues, candidate track records. That's something that we've been doing over the past elections since 2013, since Rappler was born. Typically there are cheating claims, and cheating claims usually happen, or there's conditioning around it. That became more prominent with social media, where way before the elections, they're seeded on social media. We've observed that because we've been monitoring social media very closely. Candidates in a way condition their followers, and the followers then look for all these signs, which is not necessarily a bad thing. People need to be aware that there could be cheating, but what are real indicators of cheating? How do you then validate that? How do you teach people what's validated, what's verifiable? Those are things that are challenges during elections, and we try to get to that. So in effect, you're not looking at the source of like who is asking for a fact check, but really like what is the focus of the fact checks.
That's it.
That's it.
Don't have anything to add. Everything is said.
That's something that, well, I think, well, we have a question from Celine here. Let me just, before we get into Celine, before we get into your question here, I just want to ask a question here about, Gemma brought up cheating and questions of cheating, where it sort of seems like a thing that we're seeing more globally, this idea of if people don't like the results of the election, they claim fraud or cheating or something. And I'm wondering how each of you are dealing with that.
Yeah. So we've covered elections, both paper elections and electronic elections. We're not saying that no cheating happens. That can still happen. But what is very critical is like looking at the claims themselves and looking at the basis of the claims and looking at how the system actually behaves, and how what kind of data do you anticipate that this system will spew out, so that you can then verify that against the ground. So like just some examples of what we have seen so far, like exaggerated claims about cheatings. Like in 2013, we saw this, there was this claim about supposed patterns in the results. And what we did then was supposedly at the national level, everything evened out at this particular ratio, 60-30-10. And when we looked at that and we looked at slices of the data, geographic slices of the data, what we saw was that actually the bailiwicks delivered. So the pattern does not exist when you look at the granular or even the local levels. So those things are important. So that's why really we always make sure that we have access to the data so that we can do these slices and do this analysis. The other thing is on social media, really, like for instance, when they say like something seems to have been, like one particular claim that really came out was during the elections were about fraud related to the ballots, and it's really looking at the video and checking all of those, like using the tools the tools that we already have out there. So we try to do that so that we can see if the provenance, if there's basis for believing that those that claims are really really claims of fraud are have basis. So a lot of that is comparing various sources of information. That includes data, that includes looking at election records, that includes looking at reports out there, and then seeing like, okay, if there are reports of cheating, does this mean widespread cheating? Because cheating does happen. Cheating has happened at local levels. But does that mean it affects everything? And does that mean you need to throw away the results of an entire province because of a cheating claim that is traced to one precinct? So those things are things to take into consideration.
Gilberto, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Gemma mentioned something earlier about candidates sort of condition their followers to look for certain things, and I think that's something that you're dealing with right now in Brazil, and wondering how you're approaching that challenge.
Yes, we see here in Brazil. Well, first of all, since Brazil decided to adopt the electronic voting system, there is not one single formal accusation of fraud in the election process. So I think that made politicians in general a little upset with the less possibility of fraud during the elections. So there is now a campaign against the electronic vote, trying to resurrect paper in the process. Now what they're trying to do or for one side, convince people that paper is more trustable than electronic vote, which is not. We had a lot of proof about it. and or trying to get at the final process of electronic voting, you have a paper to say whatever. So what they're trying to do is try to bring back paper to the system. And paper is pretty much fraudable, if there is this word in English. It is very easy to fraud. And we have a lot of proofs about this from years and years voting using paper. And I think that the way to get out of this is, by one side, education, in a sense that what Gemma said, explaining people about voting myths, explaining people how the system works, explaining people what is okay and what's right and what is wrong regarding the elections. So explaining the electoral process. And it should come from not only media or fact checkers, but also the Supreme Electoral Court and the regional electoral courts in Brazil. The system must educate people also. So this is one side of it. And the other is transparency. Transparency should be the motto, the slogan of the Supreme Electoral Court in Brazil. And the president of the Electoral Supreme Court of Brazil is already around Brazil, going to local House of Representatives, going to the Congress, and engaging into congresses and debates and universities, explaining how the electoral voting systems work, why it is protected, why a guy in Russia cannot pick up a laptop and get into the system, because the system is not linked into the internet. The voting system is an internet itself. So there is no way of somebody from outside the system get into it with a laptop in, I don't know, Albania or something, places like this. And the other thing is that there are layers of security in the electoral process that all parties and authorities can have access. It's not a dark box where at the end of the process, the president of Supreme Court says, okay, now the president is this guy. No, it doesn't happen like this. So you have all the parties and all the authorities have access to the system in real time, as much as the voting is happening and the voting is being counted. It's being processed, not counted because it's electronic, but being processed. So people and parties have a kind of dashboard where they can follow in real time what's going on in every city, regarding every candidate, regarding every party, regarding every state. So this is a very sophisticated and protected system. And so it's the job of media, fact checkers, and the electoral process, and all the institutions that somehow believes that the electoral process is a fundamental in democracy, is their job to explain the system to people. So this is something that is already going on in Brazil, because we feel that there are some people in and out of government trying to discredit the electronic voting system in order, to somehow get some gain from this messy situation, transform a thing that is working pretty good into a problem, and then offering a solution. And these solutions really are not good intended in general, talking about Brazilian politics.
That makes a lot of sense. Rabiu, you in Ghana, I know in the last two presidential elections, they've both been very close, and there's been some sort of murmurs about issues with ballots. And I'm wondering how you in Ghana, how you dealt with that.
I'm listening to Gilberto, and the elaborate explanation he has given about the system and how secure it is would be something similar you would explain out here in Ghana. But regardless of the defense, there are politicians who will still question that it still doesn't hold. They feel they've been cheated out of the process. And
Here
that
also.
is exactly
There will always be claims of cheating.
and
Nobody
that-
likes to
There is always,
lose.
there
I'm
is always
telling
one
you.
pain in the neck. Oh, Jesus.
So our elections ended up at the Supreme Court. There was a petition questioning the authenticity of the numbers and the credibility of the process, and seeking that the Supreme Court panel would pass their final judgment on whether the process was free and fair. And eventually, they passed their final judgment and ruled in favor of the incumbent, who was declared the winner. So it's a difficult one. So I would want to take us back to during the election process itself. So we decided to monitor the process and rely on observers, rely on journalists to ensure that if anything nefarious was going on in any part of the country, we could either confirm or debunk same. That was during the process. But in terms of declaring the results, we had a special challenge where the Electoral Commission declared the results, but that's the election management body declared the results. But on the next day, after declaring the results, there was another statement that was issued that said there was a bit of mistake with regards to the figures that were put out. And for us, looking at the spike in misinformation as soon as that came out meant that it gave oxygen to misinformers to leverage on that seed of doubt that had been planted in the minds of the public. The statements that came out to clarify that there was a bit of a challenge with regards to the numbers simply opened the floodgates. So we started paying particular attention to the various social media platforms, and particularly WhatsApp, where lots of videos and visual cards were flying around, trying to discredit the Electoral Commission, basically. So we were actively plugged in there trying to deal with the misinformation that came from that. But it is crucial that going forward, we don't have such slips, because it only allows for misinformers to leverage and take advantage of these opportunities to continue to erase whatever credibility and whatever trust the public has for such crucial institutions. And to talk about how politicians and political actors would like to leverage on such opportunities, I'm not sure it's just limited to Ghana, Africa, but we've seen it play out in very established democracies like the US, how politicians can leverage on slips to sow seeds of doubt. And it works. It works because people trust in these politicians. They are court figures. And if care is not taken, it only worsens the process. So people are talking about how the next 4 years, the next Ghanaian election is going to be crucial. Because of the various challenges that were identified this time around, because of the seeds of doubt that have been planted in the minds of some segments of the public. So it would be crucial during the next election, what Gilberto was referring to. There should be some efforts in educating the public about the process, about the safeguards in the process, about the security of the process. Nobody can easily plug into the process and take advantage and change figures and compromise the numbers. Then there is the issue about transparency. The election management body tried as much as possible to talk about they being transparent, but there were concerns coming from the opposition about how transparent the election management body was and about their coziness to the current government. So it would only be important that players feel they are operating on a level playing ground and not feel suspicious about any of the parties that are supposed to be non-partisan. And we are even still seeing it play out now, where the opposition is not taking part in inter-party discussions and reforms that are needed for the electoral process going into the next election, which would be in the next 4 years. So it's going to be difficult, but we hope the various agencies that are trying to get everybody to come around the table, because that is the only way out. We need to sit around the table and discuss and talk things through, get the political parties to come around the table and discuss these. But it will also be crucial that fact checkers build capacity and have the necessary resources to be able to, in a parallel manner, verify claims that are going viral, particularly with regards to the electoral process. So at the tail end, when we have the Electoral Commission declare a particular results, fact checkers can also independently say that in pulling together all the numbers that we had our representatives on the ground verified for themselves, it looks like the numbers are in sync with the numbers that we have been able to tally. Either we can do that independently, or we plug into credible organizations that are able to do that, to be able to put out the numbers. And we seem to have done that with regards our work with the largest election observer group in the country that also does parallel tabulation of the figures. Even though, as I said initially, the politicians were able to raise doubts about the other parallel tabulation that was done. So it's a very difficult one, but if everybody puts the resources and our efforts towards one direction, I think we should be able to successfully let the public trust in the work that we produce for them.
Oh, sorry, Gemma, did you want to jump in there?
I just want to jump in because I agree that one, transparency is very critical, but the other thing that's really critical is that fact checkers and journalists, we really need to become more numerate and be ready to challenge numbers and claims related to algorithms on like directly as the claims are being made, because this happened in the Philippines, and the seeds of doubt that you mentioned, Rabiu, like that happened here, like a claim totally unrelated, like suppose that happened in 2016 in relation to an error in the system that has to do with hash code, something like that happened in 2016, continues to be used until now for one of the critical races in 2016. That's the vice presidential race, and that's been like, there's been a number of instances when that's been the Supreme Court, which is acting as the Presidential Electoral Tribunal, like decided decided not in favor of the claimant. I would not name the claimant anymore here, but essentially, your problem here is that the seeds of doubt were never the seeds of the claim were never challenged immediately by key people or even the media groups at the start. Like we need to at the start like already look at is this a plausible basis for saying that this is cheating, or there's more to it than that. We need to start challenging people who are making those claims immediately as they make those claims, and that requires a level of a little more sophistication, both in electronic in thinking about electronic systems and in looking at numbers. Something that is fantastic should be challenged at the outset.
Gemma, just to follow up on that. So you're saying that fact checkers need to get more versed in how to deal with these electronic, like they need to be more knowledgeable of this sort of stuff?
Yeah, because sometimes, it's all about looking at numbers and logic, and systems. And are systems supposed to work that way? And as the claim is being made, like right now, what is the significance of a particular claim? Because as I mentioned before, yes, cheating does happen. We've seen cheating happen in the last elections, but they are confined to particular places. And they are actually outside of the system. But when you look at that and not contextualize that, And when journalists or fact checkers are not able to raise that immediately, that this is like, okay, this is concerning this particular precinct and should not be taken as representative of an entire province. When you let a claim fly like that without challenging the source of the claim and asking them to provide more proof at the outset, then you're actually like fanning potential flames that can reverberate, that can go on and on, and that's been used over the past years here in the Philippines. So very important that at the start we challenge.
Got it.
I don't know, Harrison, but I just want to ask Gemma something with regards how they deployed in the Philippines. So I'm sensing two things here: tackling viral misinformation and having the resources to be able to either confirm or debunk or raise suspicion about the numbers that are coming out from the election management group.
Yes.
So are you able to do those two things at the same time?
So we do monitor social media. That's Rappler's born in digital, so we really like monitor it in real time, and we've been studying that. 2016, I think, was the first election where you actually see social media playing a significant role in the outcome of the race. And then, so that's something we monitor closely. We look at that and we raise alarms when we're seeing things that are worrisome, like harassment of public of supporters and so on, but or rampant disinformation, which can be in the form of actual claims that are posted, but also in the form of astroturfing, making it appear like certain a consensus is happening when in fact they're just sock puppets working together. So those things are important, but at the same time, the fact of the matter is the actual race is happening on the ground. The actual process is happening on the ground. And a big part of that, we agree, transparency is critical, pushing the bodies that are supposed to like oversee the process to be transparent as possible, to be as transparent as possible is important. Like Rab, you mentioned, Rabiu, we also coordinate way ahead with watchdog groups, because that's one way to multiply yourself, by working with watchdog groups and looking at what they are also seeing. It's really about triangulating, looking at sources of information out there that can help you validate and have more eyes on the ground. We also work closely with volunteers. We have a civic engagement arm. Rappler has a civic engagement arm, and the civic engagement arm, ahead of the elections, we've been training also people who can work with us, volunteers who can work with us. We're doing that now because there's an election coming up, 2022, and it's a general election, so it's presidential and local, and we're electing so many people. But which means you need more eyes on the ground and you need volunteers. So that's a big part of it. It's really multiple layers because elections are complex systems. and I don't think fact checkers themselves can, a single organization can actually address it. We work with other media groups because like in the 2019 elections, we work with other groups who in a collaboration around fact-checking the election. So that's Check PH, and that one was working with the other fact-check organizations, other news organizations, and academia. So it's multiple layers.
That actually segues. So we have about 8 minutes left. We have a few questions here, and Celine asked a question directed to you, Rabiu, about the training that you did of people ahead of time, and she was basically wondering if you mobilized some of these students on election day and how that worked.
Yeah, so for the journalists who were trained, they were part of a network. So we have a a shared WhatsApp group where we encourage that if there are viral claims going around in your catchment area, you alert us to. So you alert us to the viral claim, then we collaborate with whatever journalist or media organization to debunk the claim. And after debunking the claim, we publish on our platform, which would be in English in text. But it is crucial that if it's gone beyond maybe your region or your district, we try to cross-publish these on the multiple partner media organizations that are part of the project. So we alert the other media organizations in the network to cross-publish them on their platforms. And in cross-publishing them on their platforms, they don't necessarily have to publish in English. They publish in multiple local languages. So we are able to reach people on multiple levels by leveraging on the networks that we built during the process. So the journalists, one, the media organizations, two. For the students that we engage, we didn't necessarily use them during the election process. What we hoped to do was to cause a ripple of the trainings we did. So by training tertiary institution students, we were hoping that when they go home and there are some videos and visual cards that their parents or maybe a relative has chanced on WhatsApp, the person doesn't necessarily swallow that hook, line, and sinker. The person will be critical and question that and say, is this true? And show it to his student or his son or his brother. And because you have the skill of verifying, you can independently do the verification yourself. You can simply do a reverse search. You can simply check on Google Images whether the picture has been used before. So this was what we were hoping to achieve. And I think largely we were able to tick some of the boxes that we set for ourselves. And we would go back to we'll commission some studies again to see whether we've made the kind of impact we were expecting.
I would like to add something because we made a training also here in Brazil to journalists and students in every capital of every state. And it showed to be a very good action because, you know, in a big country like Brazil, you have different strategies of misinformation depending on the state and depending on the city. So it would be impossible for us in Rio de Janeiro trying to fight or fact check or debunk or verify any kind of stuff that's going on in the Amazon. Mm-hmm. Because there the nature of misinformation and the actors involved in it are pretty much local. So it was much more efficient training local people to fight misinformation, and they did it during the elections, than trying to do this from a big center like Rio or São Paulo in the southeast of Brazil. So it made a lot of difference, this kind of training of local people to fight local misinformation regarding the elections.
Important. That's important.
I think strategy goes to the heart of how effective you can deploy and use your resources. And the strategy should be informed by how much you understand the local dynamics and the nuance with regards to the ecosystem of misinformation wherever you find yourself. The reason why you could see in Mexico the understanding of the space and how to deploy the thin resources available to Gilberto would mean he decentralizes. And here in Ghana, understanding how many people we have online and offline and how effective we could be by collaborating and leveraging on the reach of traditional media, we are deploying whatever we are deploying here.
Got it. We're almost out of time, but I want to get to this one last question here that sort of ties into some of the things we've been talking about. They ask, how do we get mainstream media organizations, TV, radio, newspaper, online media on board in a networked effort that highly focuses on fact checking if they already have their respective election coverages that take up so much of their time? So how do you get buy-in?
Well, in Brazil, the Supreme Electoral Court was the catalyzer of a group of media and fact checkers to work with them against misinformation regarding the electoral process. So what the president of the Electoral Court did was that they made a meeting with all representatives of traditional media and all fact checkers and made a group together so that they convinced them that they should prioritize some misinformation regarding the electoral process. And it worked pretty well. As I told you, they have a group for media and fact checkers. They have a group for the social media platforms also, working with TikTok, with Facebook, with Google. And they also have a group of themselves in order to establish a communication system to bring the answer to misinformation as fast as possible. So who are the people that need to be in charge of this or that function in fighting misinformation? So these guys are gonna work 24/7 in the week of the elections, you know, paying attention and bringing answers to misinformation that is spreading around, okay? So that was the way that they did, using media and fact checkers, using the social platforms, and also using the system, the electoral system itself.
So you sort of have to build this culture to show people why this is important and get them to buy into it. Got it. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. We could probably talk a little bit more about this, but I wanted to thank all of our panelists for joining us. And I want to thank you around the world for joining us. We have next week, we have another session, another IFCN talk where we're talking to members of the Duke Reporters Lab. There'll be some more information about that later today. So if you want to join us then, that would be good. That's next Wednesday at 10 a.m. East Coast time. And that is all for us. I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye-bye.